Good morning. I now call this public meeting of the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment to order. My name is Katrina Knockleby, and I am the MLA for Great Slave, and I am the acting chair of this committee. Today, the Standing Committee on Economic Development and Environment is holding a public clause-by-clause review of Bill 84, an act to amend the Northwest Territories Business Development and Investment Corporation Act. Please note this meeting is being live-streamed on the Assembly's media channels. I will now ask members to introduce themselves for the record, starting with the member in the room.
Kevin O'Reilly, Frame Lake.
Thank you. I will now move to the members online.
Ron Bondrus, MLA Detroit.
Good morning, everyone. Rylan Johnson, MLA for Yellowknife North.
Thank you. And MLA Jackie Jacobson has been a bit intermittently joining in and out, so he may pop on as well during the meeting. I will now ask the Honourable Carolyn Wawzonek, the Minister of Industry, Tourism and Investment, to introduce her officials and provide some opening remarks. Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I am very pleased to participate in this morning's Standing Committee public hearing with respect to Bill 84, and I have 4 witnesses with me. Joyce Taylor on my left, Chief Executive Officer with the BDIC, Edwin Hsu behind me, Director of Finance and Programs with BDIC, Leslie Dragon, Manager of Public Affairs, Marketing and Business Services with BDIC, and on my right, Christina Duffy, Director of Legislation Division at the Department of Justice, and Madam Chair, I ought not to forget Drew Robertson also in the room, I'm a Ministerial Special Advisor. With respect to some brief opening remarks, Madam Chair, the BDIC Act and regulations have not been comprehensively updated since their introduction in 2005, despite there being significant market changes over the intervening years. Based on recommendations in the last 5-year program review, the BDIC and direction received from the BDIC board, an in-depth legislative review with public engagement over the last 18 months was conducted. I want to extend gratitude on behalf of the BDIC board to the 130 businesses and stakeholders who invested their time and resources to participate in the research and public engagement sessions. This resulted in a What We Heard report being issued to the public in November of 2022. I also want to extend my gratitude to the chairpersons and members of the board, both former and current, who have played a central role in identifying the opportunity for change at the BDIC. The board, which is comprised of a diverse group of individuals, including Indigenous women and visible minorities from across the territory, has brought invaluable knowledge and expertise from the fields of business, finance, and law to the organization. Also, having an open and transparent board recruitment process that utilizes best practices, such as an objective board competency matrix and a nomination committee, has contributed to having such a strong board. And the result of all of this and the extensive undertaking by the BDIC and its board of directors is Bill 84, which modernizes and amends the BDIC Act to enhance clarity and transparency and value-added supports offered to Northwest Territories entrepreneurs and businesses. There are 9 amendments being put forth that will increase flexibility and enable the organization to address business needs, issues, and opportunities, generating positive impacts in the business sector for the Northwest Territories. The 9 amendments in Bill 84 will play an important role in helping entrepreneurs and businesses thrive in the Northwest Territories and will contribute to a stronger and more diversified economy as they create flexibility for the organization to better support community businesses in the NWT. This concludes my opening remarks. I'll be happy to answer questions the committee may have.
Thank you, Madam Minister, and thank you to all your staff and the BDIC that worked on this bill. I will open the floor now to questions from members. Would anyone like to get started? Member O'Reilly, go ahead.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. When I went on, I'm on the Department of Executive and Intergovernmental Affairs website, and that's where you can find out who sits on various boards. I see that the chair and vice chair position for BDIC are currently vacant. Can someone tell me how long those positions have been vacant and if there's any plans to fill them? Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Madam Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, there is right now quorum, so there's no concern about the board being able to conduct its business. And given the timing of the election, the intention is to maintain the quorum for now and then have the new board appointees appointed by a new minister when that takes effect.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Mr. O'Reilly, follow-up?
Yeah, thanks. A different line of questioning, if I can. I was here in the last assembly, I think when there was a number of reviews conducted of BDIC and some, I think, good ideas that were generated. And I see that many of the changes in the bill are actually in response to those reviews. I went back and I checked the discussion paper and the What We Heard report. I agree with the minister. I think that there was some good work done there. But one of the most fundamental changes that's being proposed in the bill is a name change. And there was nothing in the discussion paper, nothing in the What We Heard report, nothing in the whole public engagement, as far as I could see, about changing the name of BDIC. So can someone confirm whether that was the case for me? Is that understanding correct, that the name change was not part of any of the public engagement? Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Madam Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the rebranding effort was begun during a strategic planning process that the board undertook. I think it was early in my term in this role. And so certainly has went through a different path than what the reporting efforts would have been over the last assembly. That process itself, though, did certainly include a fair bit of research and work done to look at what the name is, look at whether or not it is well known, whether or not it has quite a bit of overlap with other organizations, how easily it's found on the internet, etc. So there was a fair bit of work put into it. It didn't necessarily take the same path as the legislative reviews. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Before I do a second round, are there others that would like to ask a first question? Not seeing. I can open for second. Go ahead, Member O'Reilly.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. Just to follow up again then. There was nothing in the legislative review about the name change. There was some kind of parallel strategic planning work that the BDIC was doing internally. Was there any public engagement on the name change? Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Madam Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, the CEO was actually at lead, so let me turn to her perhaps to speak to that in more detail.
Sure. Go ahead, Ms. Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It is a good question. We did have public engagement via an audit of the brand name and our awareness of the business community seeking input from key strategic contributors from the business community, as well as from the board. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Taylor. Member O'Reilly, do you have a follow-up?
Yeah, thanks for that. I guess I can't go too far because I will say that it was very, very difficult for a committee to obtain information about the name change. And we had to make several repeated requests for information about this. I've had an opportunity to review it, and I think it would be fair to say that there was limited engagement, very limited engagement. And I'm just wondering why there wasn't any broader public engagement during the process to consider a name change. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Madam Minister?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, the branding was really meant to be something that was focused, was again initiated by the board as part of their strategic response. It was then conducted largely by the board and driven by the board through and the staff, using a professional marketing agency based in the Northwest Territories with a northern perspective. But it isn't one where we would be asking what is the functionality of the Act, what is required in the Act to make services better. Those certainly were the subject of the public review process that we mentioned earlier, and I appreciate the members' comments about seeing those reflected in the changes. But the name and the brand really was meant to be driven corporately and not sort of a, and I know that the member's not suggesting this, but this isn't a public vote on, what do we name this, the Elon Musk at the, City Hall. It's really not meant to be that. It wasn't meant to be an wide open event. So the process that was undertaken was fairly extensive. It did involve, evaluating, the length of for example, the length of the name, its uniqueness, its whether it could be pronounced, its ability for translation. Was the domain name available? So there was an extensive process undertaken. It did involve key stakeholders who could speak to their thoughts on the name, on new names, what they'd be needing from the name. But it wasn't the same as looking at, what do you use BDIC for, and how can we improve its functionality, which is properly the function and form of a wider public engagement. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Mr. O'Reilly, do you have any more questions? Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Not so much a question, I guess, as a comment. Yeah, it's very unfortunate that the name change became intertwined with the, I think, the changes that I could support in here, and there was almost no public engagement around the name change. And unfortunately, probably 3/4 of the clauses in the bill actually deal with name changes. So I think it's very, very difficult to separate out the name change from the other parts of the bill. And of course, I would note that all of the points that the minister just raised in support of the name change, none of that information is public. None of that information that was provided to committee we can share, or BDIC itself for that matter. So I think that's very problematic, and committee repeatedly asked for this information, and it took a lot of effort to finally get it. So I'll leave it at that for now. Thanks, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. Madam Minister, did you want to respond?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yeah, Madam Chair, we certainly did have a few back and forths about just how much detail to be provided. And, look, at the end of the day, this is a name change by the organization. There's a lot of detail in the Act because of the way that the name of the Act comes up so frequently in the Act. So it's by necessity that it winds up being in there, not because it has a functional purpose aside from identifying the organization about which the legislation is speaking, which I appreciate will therefore mean that it's difficult to parse out. Certainly, I think, underestimated that committee would find themselves so intertwined and so connected to what the name of an organization needed to be. And I don't mean that in a negative sense. I just did not anticipate that committee would be so attached to what the name should or should not be. The Chamber of Commerce, or the Territories Chamber of Commerce, had 85% of their survey respondents come back and say they like the name. It's not a scientific survey. I can't speak to how well or how widely done that was done. It is, at the end of the day, a name. I regret that is taking over the conversation of what the substantive changes are. I agree with the member that there's a lot more in there that actually does have substance. And so, yeah, in the end, just to be clear, essentially every piece of paper available on the name change did ultimately go to committee. It's a lot. So at least there's now that ability for the committee to understand that fulsome process. I don't know that that's a process that any organization would normally put out as a public process. Some might for a public perspective, or for like a public, again, whether Microsoft might do that differently because it's fun and cool, fine. But that's not how the BDIC is necessarily going to run itself when it's trying to have a rebranding. Thank you.
Thank you, and I would agree. I think that's a fair point. But I think we always have to be aware that there's a context around and there's a history of things just, having new names and nothing substantially changed. So I do feel there is a bigger picture in that all, and it is regrettable that we haven't been able to advance it to where we wanted it on both sides. So I'm looking at the room or online. Is there anybody else that would like to comment here? This is your shot. I'm not seeing anyone else, so I think at that point we will thank the Minister for that, and we will proceed to the clause by clause. Does committee agree to conduct a clause by clause review of Bill 84, an act to amend the Northwest Territories Business Development and Investment Corporation Act? No. Committee has not agreed to proceed to a clause by clause review. MLA O'Reilly?
Thanks, Madam Chair. I move that Bill 84, an act to amend the Northwest Territories Business Development and Investment Corporation Act, be reported to the Assembly as not ready for consideration in Committee of the Whole. Thank you.
The motion is in order to the motion. MLA Johnson. I'll come back to you.
Thank you. Well, I guess I'll make a couple comments here. I would like this bill to proceed. I guess I'll start with my thoughts on branding exercises. They're extremely difficult. People have very strong opinions on branding. They naturally kind of like to micromanage them. So congrats to the board of BDIC for getting through one and finding a new name. It's never easy, and I know it's always hard for comms professionals to try and get that consensus. And in this case, then it had to go through cabinet, and then unfortunately it had to go through committee, and the majority of committee does not seem content with the name change. I really don't have an opinion either way. It seems fine to me. And then I guess secondly, and probably more importantly, is I just don't view it as this committee's role to manage branding exercises. We spend a lot of time talking about organizations being arm's length and the importance of the BDIC being arm's length and free from political interference. And here we are as politicians now interfering in something such as minor as a brand change. I don't do that as our role, and I would encourage my committee colleagues to reconsider and that we allow the BDIC to be arm's length, pick a new name, and go forward and hopefully correct some of that past history and move on. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Mr. O'Reilly.
Yeah, thanks, Madam Chair. So I started earlier with some comments about how I believe that a number of these changes are constructive and required as a result of independent reviews. And so those parts of the bills I have no problem supporting, but something as fundamental as the name change, the difficulty in getting the background information. I've been on a number of committees in my 7 years. This was one of the most difficult tasks as a committee member in my tenure here, was trying to get the information to understand the rationale for the name change. When I saw it, I don't believe that it's rigorous or comprehensive as the minister has described it, and I do believe very strongly that it should be the subject of public engagement. And part of our job here as MLAs is to ensure that the public does have a say in these sorts of things. So I believe very strongly in public engagement, the right of the public to have a say in these things, and I don't think that was done in this particular case around the name change, and it's so integrated into every aspect of the bill. It's probably possible to change it and take the name change out, but it would be a very difficult task, and I think it would be better to go back and have some more work done on the name change. The other things I've suggested are fine. I would also suggest that the information that was provided to committee in confidence about the name change should be made public so that everybody can understand what the rationale was and express whatever views they may have. I would also suggest that this legislation be brought back early in the life of the next assembly, and that it should focus on the parts of the bill that deal with more substantive matters than the name change, because I think those are required. Lastly, with regard to the name change, I have had individuals in the business community approach me and say that they don't support this. That's anecdotal. It's not rigorous or comprehensive, as I don't think the work that was originally done either. So I think there is some issues around the name change and how rigorous that work can and should have been. Personally, I don't think that Prosper NWT really describes the function of BDIC, and that's my own personal views. And having seen the information that was provided to us in confidence, I can't really support it either. And I tried to maintain an open mind on that issue. That's why I wanted to see the information. When we got it, it didn't really convince me that this was a good or necessary thing either, even if it was undertaken as part of strategic planning. I think those are my remarks for now, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. O'Reilly. And as the chair, I wouldn't normally comment. I just wanted to say that that was a question in trying to reach compromise. I asked is, could we just separate out the name change and move forward? And as we've heard, it was not going to be an easy task. So I do want to say the point of, that it would normally not have come forward if it wasn't in the legislation so much has really hit home to me. So are there any other members that would like to speak? I'm not seeing or hearing anyone, so the motion is in order to the motion. Go ahead, Mr. O'Reilly.
Question. Thank you.
Thank you. We all have a script, and sometimes it's hard to remember where we are. So question has been called. All those in favor? All those opposed?
Opposed?
Motion is carried. Bill 84, an act to amend the Northwest Territories Business Development and Investment Corporation Act will be reported to the Assembly as not ready for consideration in the Committee of the Whole. Thank you to Minister Wawzonek and her staff and members of the BDIC that are here. This concludes the public review of Bill 84. Committee, we will now go in camera until 12 p.m., at which time we will hold a public clause-by-clause review of Bill 93, the Engineering and Geosciences Act. Is there a motion to go in camera? Is there a motion to go in camera? Thank you, Mr. Bonnet-Rouge. That concludes the public portion of our meeting. Thank you.